Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, there's always going to be something that draws us back home, and if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean we are in the seats with once more, as always. My name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and pick their brain on current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and you know, so very much more in a light and conversational fashion, because that's how we like to do things around here. And if you like how we do things, I mean, you're listening to us right now, I'm assuming you do, you can subscribe to us. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, basically wherever you get your podcasts. And plus, we archive every single one of our episodes over at our YouTube channel, and it would be great if you could subscribe there too. Also, you can find us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, at either at In the Seats or at It's Podcast One for all sorts of updates. And finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca for all the latest and greatest movie news and reviews from the world of entertainment, television, film, and beyond. Because we love talking about the moving image, and we love it when you read about it. So please come and pay us a visit. You will not regret it. We're coming at you with more Hot Docs coverage, believe it or not. We got plenty, and we are taking a look at the film Grey Roads, which is playing in the Canadian Spectrum program at Hot Docs until May 9th at hotdocs.ca. I do recommend you go check it out if you want to stream some fantastic documentary cinema and support a really quality film festival. And we're looking at, like I said, we're looking at the film Grey Roads, which tracks the story of a Toronto filmmaker who is returning to his hometown to reconnect with his father and his grandfather. The two men who really have, in one way or another, shaped his life. And it's this film that's shot in black and white, and it really sort of weighs the pros and cons of, you know, you want to leave home, but then you go home, and it makes for a really fascinating dynamic, and takes a look at sort of the nature of masculinity and sort of the toxicity that it can have, and how so much of that is just sort of taught and bred in from earlier generations. And it's a quality film, which, like I said, I do recommend you check out. It's beautifully shot in black and white with sort of a POV style where it just sort of sits there and lets you sort of take in everything that's going on. But we sat with director Jesse McCraken to talk about the inspiration for the film, just sort of how he started off, and just sort of the whole process therein, and what he learned at the end of it. But it was a really interesting talk for a really interesting film, and I certainly hope you enjoy it. Obviously, congratulations on the film, man. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I mean, walk me through, I guess, sort of the early stages of deciding to do it.
Yeah. This has been an idea that's it's been sort of percolating for years. Probably back, 8 years ago or so. I come from a small town, and as obviously you see in the movie, there was a point where I was ready to get out of it. But as I was living and working in Toronto and getting into the film industry and into this sort of crazy lifestyle of working in film, I would just love coming back to Markdale and, hanging out with friends and family and just like enjoying that sort of quiet, peaceful existence that is there. And so I was always sort of curious about, why am I electing to get away from here and take on this sort of crazy lifestyle in the city, whereas things could be so much more similar in a small town. So I think that's where the original idea sort of came from. I just thought I just want to interview people in my small town someday and talk about it. And then over the years, as I was coming back, you just saw the town slowly degrading, and saw people losing a lot of hope in the town as well. My parents and other friends, other people in the town we would talk to, and I thought, there's something interesting there. This is a common story that so many other places across, North America and the world, so many small towns are going through similar things. So, I thought there's some sort of interesting story to tell. And then some more events happened a few years ago, and my only family left in town was my dad and grandfather. And I thought, well, there's something even more interesting here. It's sort of the ties between men sort of living and staying in this town, um, as well as seeing the town degrade. So that's where the idea came from. And then a few years ago, it felt like the right time to make it.
I mean, it makes for such an interesting dynamic too, because I mean, on one end, because I mean, I grew up in a small town too, and you want to get out, you want to flee, you want to go to the city, but then after a while in the city, you yearn for the small town lifestyle, but we've let the small town start to fade away a little bit. And I'm kind of curious because obviously you're there with your camera and you're shooting and you're talking to people. Were they receptive? Because showing the decay of something is not always necessarily a happy thing. I mean, some people may have been aware of it, some people may not have been. It makes for a, like, was there any kind of pushback when you're sort of running around your hometown with a camera trying to get sort of these honest moments that you got in the film?
Yeah, I think I was lucky with the timing of when I started to film, because um, it ended up being a time when things were starting to change within the town. It had sort of been stagnant and decaying for years and years, and then slowly these things are starting to happen where I'd hear about, a certain couple in town who were fighting for the school. Like, yes, these things are happening. The school was maybe being closed, the old folks home as well, but you heard about people in the town who were fighting for these things, and who were fighting for this sense of community and this old community feeling that's so present in small towns. So I think a lot of people were very receptive. I was lucky that the timing of it just was good. So I was able to get people who were, yes, willing to talk about the decay of it, but also were like, but this is happening and we're excited about this, and we're feeling good about the future. We're starting to feel more optimistic about it. I think if I had made the film, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, there wasn't much happening, and it would have been a lot more depressing of just sort of, oh, it's another small town that's going through this and they might not get out of it, But I think it was the timing where I was really lucky. So I was able to get a lot of good reception from the subjects. Absolutely.
What is it about that sense of community that really, as a species, we always take for granted? Because on one end we want it, but we never appreciate it until we don't have it. Like, I'm kind of curious from your perspective, what is it about that sense of community that we sort of need and hold on to, but ignore at the same time? It's we really have a weird relationship with it when it comes to wanting community.
Yeah. I think I agree with what you were saying, where it's just sort of, I didn't really feel wasn't starting to feel the loss of the community too much until I started the timing of this film, starting to think about making it and things, and starting to see the remnants of people I knew from the past around town. It's a different town, but I also knew people who I grew up with and things like that. So but you really start to feel it once you start talking to these people, this sort of this sense of knowing other people and keeping up to is that you do often know pretty much everyone, and you really need to work that feeling of community. But yeah, I don't know. I think it was something that I took for granted as well. And I would, as I was making this movie and driving around my town and, seeing different places from where I was growing up, and shooting images of these places that meant so much to me, I would think about, stories from back then, and think about how great of a community I was able to grow up in, and how lucky I was. And now you see it's a different style of community now that's slowly happening in Markdale, but I think it's headed in the right direction. I think a lot of people know that, and hopefully it's for the positive.
When you set out on this, was black and white always the choice? Because I love the use of it, but I mean, I'm curious, was it something you decided along the way, or did you always intended on trying to make it sort of this capsule outside of sort of the world that we live in, and so we can sort of see what's going on sort of as this separate bubble?
Yeah, it was definitely intentional. It was I originally shot some development footage with my grandpa, like probably 4 or 5 years ago, just gearing up to apply for some grants. And I shot that on 16 millimeter black and white, and sort of realized how restricting that would be to try and shoot a whole documentary on that, and how expensive and ridiculous it would be. But immediately when I wanted to do it, I just felt like I wanted it to have this timeless feeling. Like this place could feel like it's, a documentary from the 60s or something, from when my grandpa was younger. But there's different things happening in it where I wanted people to get this feeling as, through the beginning of the movie, it feels like you're in this film just talking about the old days and seeing these images that look very old and timeless. But then as time goes on, I wanted to challenge those sort of timeless images. And I thought that would be interesting too, to have these black and white images of these new things happening, these new people coming to town. And so, yeah, I think it was always in my mind, and it was always in my mind to make it feel like a Western as well, like an old style Western, because my dad and grandpa grew up loving those kinds of movies, and I felt like a bit of an homage to them as well. And that was a big inspiration for the soundtrack too. So, yeah, I think there was just so many different reasons that black and white felt right. And I'm so happy with how the color came out, like how the colorist did with making it feel like, to me, it feels like an old photograph or 16 millimeter film. I love how it turned out.
What was your family always on board? Because I mean, as much as this is a story about the town, it's still a very personal story as well, with your father and your grandfather, and like they're very intertwined throughout the entire film. Were they on board in taking part in the story that you wanted to tell?
Yeah, well, I think it evolved. I think that was a big part of it, was that I didn't come in immediately telling them like, I want to make this movie about three generations of men growing up in small towns. Like, I sort of said that, but not really knowing where we would go with that. But they felt very much that Markdale was a part of the story too, and I think that helped them. They knew that there was a story to tell about Markdale, and as time went on, we would ease each other into deeper interviews, and I would talk about how the editing was going, and places that we were going, and feedback from friends and colleagues about places that we should go. And yeah, it was just a long conversation with them, and trying to be as transparent as possible throughout the filming. And I think, yeah, they were on board throughout the beginning. They didn't know exactly where it was going to go, and I didn't either. But I'm like so proud and happy with these two men who are quite reserved sometimes, that they were able to go on this journey with me, and be willing to be open with me and with the audience. And I think it's like really inspirational for other men like them, I hope, to see these two guys do that, and go on this journey.
Now, I mean, watching the film, obviously you shot most of it pre-COVID, but I'm kind of curious, has what's been going on in the world sort of changed the resolve of the town? Because obviously there were challenges before, all the challenges that we're all facing. I'm kind of curious, had you been shooting later, how would have that changed the film, do you feel?
Yeah, it would have been weird for sure. Like, I did film a tiny bit of footage in the summer, sort of near the ending of the film, with my dad and grandpa. I got tested, and just filmed some basic shots and things that I wanted to pick up. But yeah, that's the COVID thing, is a whole other story to tell. And honestly, they've done okay throughout it. Like, the town itself they've done okay with cases and things. And I don't know. I don't think it's like ruined the town or anything. They're definitely going to come out of it okay. A lot of the small businesses have been able to stay afloat, and there's been a lot of support for the local businesses. So yeah, it would have been another story to tell, but overall, I don't think it would have made things seem too much more dire or anything.
If anything, it's probably easier to social distance in a small town than it is in a city like Toronto.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, I'm curious, thinking back for you, sort of, was there a moment in your life or like a movie in your life that sort of you can sort of focus down on and call it like the pivot point in your life when you decided, okay, I want to be a filmmaker, I want to be a storyteller?
Um, yeah, I think, I mean, the biggest one that I always think of, which is cliche, but it was Pulp Fiction. You know, I saw it when I was way too young, and I was just sort of blown away by what a movie could be and where it could go, kind of thing. And that made me super interested in seeing more movies, more art films, and things like that. And I was always very into visuals like photography and drawing, and that really got the itch going. And I remember, like, back when I was younger, driving, you know, a half hour away to go to Blockbuster with my mom, and we would always pick out like a documentary of some sort every week, a documentary and maybe some sort of independent art film. And I just remember those moments watching those movies with my mom, just being, you know, so sort of curious about that world, and so interested in the documentary form at that point too, where I was just so fascinated to hear of other people's stories around the world that you could relate to, where especially relating to it while you're in a small town, you know, it was very eye-opening.
Well, no, and I mean the documentary form really does allow for so much creativity and room to play and tell these very interesting stories, like I think you've done here. Because I mean, your film, while it does very have a very, I guess, distinct male gaze to it, that's probably the wrong word, but while it is very masculine, it has this very sort of tone to it. It's not overbearing or foreboding, and it's not sort of the preconceived notions of what these kind of men are supposed to be. It really sort of allows for a much more open portrait of, again, I guess humanity, really sort of allowing to understand that people are people as opposed to trying to sort of judge the book by the cover, if you know, as the old saying goes.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. I'm really happy to hear that. It was definitely a big part of it, was knowing that it's, you know, this film is about three white men in a small town, and um, how do we bring that in and make the tone so it doesn't feel like it's sensationalizing it or like trying to put it on a pedestal. It needs to show the good and the bad of it. And it was just me trying to understand it more, to be honest. You know, it was just me wanting to get to know my dad and grandpa more, and know where this type of masculinity comes from, and just be curious, try to be an objective filmmaker about it, you know, while at the same time it is your family. But yeah, I'm happy to hear that that tone is coming across. I hope it comes across for everyone who watches it. It's a big part of it for sure.
Do you think it, because I mean, obviously you're not going to get to do the traditional festival run with it, you're going to have to do everything virtually, but at the end of the day, like, is that the hope for the film, to just sort of give this broader look at sort of the complexity of being a guy, or being, or what it used to be, you know, sort of the predisposed notion of being a, you know, white heterosexual male in a small town used to be?
Yeah, I think it's trying to you know, I think a lot of times these days small towns are discounted, and but at the same time, a town like Markdale is seeing a lot more people move up from the city, and everybody's becoming closer together. All these different communities are becoming closer together. So I just wanted to try and make a portrait of some of these rougher sort of men in small towns, and try and show that they are a bit more complex, and to try and understand that they can change, and sometimes it's slow, as you see in Markdale with the town as well. The town changing is a slow process, but I my hope is that people will just, yeah, understand a bit more of the complexity of it, like I learned as well. And and just, yeah, have more of a feeling of empathy and humanity, and that maybe we can try to work together a bit more and not discount or just suddenly pass them off as as a certain stereotype or something.
No, and you know what? I think the film does that and then some. And just thank you for putting a highlight on your small town and pushing forward what I think is a really interesting point of conversation, which really at the end of the day is why you're going to make films like this.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot. Glad to hear that.
Cheers. And thanks again for the time, man. Congratulations. And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.